The views and opinions of the guests of Veterans Archives do not reflect the views and opinions of Veterans Archives, its subsidiaries, or its partners. Hello and welcome to Veterans Archives. This is a podcast where you can learn about our military history in the words and voices of the men and women who lived and created it. I'm your host, Bill Krieger, and let's listen to our next story.
The date is July 10th, 2023. We're in Concord at Damien Wetzel's farm. How you doing today, Damien?
Great. Yourself?
Excellent. I'm glad to be out here amongst the horses and
hayfields
and tractors. So today we're going to talk a little bit about Damien's military history and some things that he's done with Consumers Energy with the Veterans Advisory Panel. That sound good to you, Damien?
Let's get at it.
All right. So where are you originally from?
Concord, Michigan, right here. Raised in my other grandfather's farmhouse, about 4 miles from here. Still in Concord. My parents are both from Concord. They met in high school. And I was the oldest of 3 boys. I was born in 71, Christmas Day, named Damien. And up until the 2nd grade, we lived in Concord. And during the downturn in the late 70s, the family, we moved to Tomball, Texas. So outside of Houston, because Dad being a tool maker, industry was on the downturn, and he went where the work was. So we lived down there for a couple years. Went to kindergarten. Actually went there right around kindergarten. Down there for 2 years. Me and my brothers, Mark and Brad, and then moved back towards the end of 2nd grade. So we're down there 2 years. The economy turned around. Mom got homesick, wanted to be back, with family, and probably so did my dad. So this house right here is my grandfather Wetzel's house.
Okay.
So after he served in World War II, came home, and my dad was born in 1950. So 5 years later, Grandpa and Grandma lived in a couple different houses and then moved into this farmhouse and had my dad, and I was fortunate enough to buy it off my grandfather when I got out of the military.
Okay. So do you still keep in touch with your brothers?
Yes. Yep. I have one brother who lives in Treasure Island, Florida. He's the cool uncle. No kids. Him and his wife's an attorney. So fortunate enough to go down there in the spring and play golf. And when the girls, I have 2 daughters, Hannah and Grace, and my wife, Chris, met her at Michigan Tech in college. We'll get to that. Girls would go down there for spring break. It's nice to have a brother who lives 3 houses from the Gulf of Mexico. So that's pretty cool. And my other brother, Brad, he lives in Scotts by Kalamazoo. He has 2 sons, and they're both in college, just like my 2 daughters are in college.
Okay. And are your parents still around, or?
Yes. My mom and dad, when we moved back from Texas, my grandfather gave my dad a parcel. So this was an original 40, the back 40. It was literally 40 acre split. And my grandfather gave my dad a 1 acre, and that's the house that's right next door. So my father and grandfather built that house, built the basement. My dad worked 3rd shift at Aeroquip, now Eaton, as a tool maker. And we lived in the basement for a year while Dad and Grandpa built the house up top kind of deal. Just sheets, 3 boys. And Mom, took care of us. Built that, but then Dad wanted his own farm, kind of, so to speak. And then we moved 5 miles from here, 5.3 miles, because I walk every Saturday over to their house, have breakfast with Mom and Dad. And he has his own 120-acre farm still in Concord. Yep, so, they're still around.
So on the farm, I've always grown up to understand or with the idea or assumption that you would like a farmhouse breakfast, like you eat pancakes and eggs and like a huge breakfast every day. Is that correct? Is that true?
I do want to go to Mom's. She still cooks, like 3 boys live there. So she'll still cook a pound of bacon, a pound of breakfast sausage, a dozen fried eggs and half a loaf of bread. And it's just me and Dad eating. So I'll do my best to make Mom happy.
Okay. And so what high school did you graduate from?
Concord High School.
Concord High School?
Yeah.
How big was your class?
Huge. 52. 52. So, yeah. So I went to Concord, played sports. Dad was my baseball coach growing up. He worked nights, he worked third shift, so he'd coach baseball and then go into work kind of deal with me and my brothers. So played baseball growing up, got in high school. Pretty good student. Football, baseball, basketball kind of deal. Golf our first couple years, and then I grew 4 inches and gained 30 pounds. So played football. Yep. And I did. I enjoyed it, even though I didn't have any aggression in me a bit. I was very, very timid. I was like the big lug that never said anything in high school.
What position did you play in football?
Tight end and defensive end. Very
Both
slow.
ways.
Both, well, when you only got 18 kids on the team, and that's nearly half the boys in the school.
Right on. So, when you graduated high school, did you go directly to college or?
Yes and no. So, back then so I graduated high school in 1990. A lot of my buddies were going to Michigan Tech. I knew Grandpa Wetzel was in World War II. I respected that, even though he never talked about it, ever. I knew his twin brother, Orrin, who my father was named after. My dad's name is Orrin, died in the Bataan Death March. Well, from what we can gather, he got to a camp and died there. I enlisted in the Army Reserve split option. So if you remember that time, you being a recruiter.
Oh, yeah.
So
best option.
Well, I knew I wanted to serve my country, so to speak, but I didn't want to go all in, right? So you did that was the next thing. Yeah. I had good grades. I got accepted to Michigan Tech. 3 days after graduation, June 9th, I think, went to basic training, Fort Dix, New Jersey. Just for basic training, did the 9 weeks there. Mom and Dad came and picked me up, I think with my girlfriend at the time, and came back home, and then like 2 weeks later started Michigan Tech. So back then it was like you just apply and I guess I'll go there, and we didn't do visits or anything like that. It was like, well, my buddies are going there and I got accepted. So I guess I've always been pretty nonchalant about that stuff. Taking what's been handed to me, but I've been really blessed. So I get out, go to Michigan Tech, and it's like, oh, what's this? So we didn't really have a counselor in high school. So as far as figuring out college, my parents didn't go to college. I get there and it's like, what's this ROTC program? Because the recruiter, he got me what I wanted. I remember going to MEP station and, getting the physical and signing up for whatever your MOS is. And, by the way, 71 Lima.
So what was 71 Lima?
Administrative specialist, and I was leaving the next day for spring break. So it was somewhat of a target-rich environment from what I was told. So I chose that.
So yeah, 71.
I had one thing on my mind going on spring break the next day for my senior year in high school. But then I found out about ROTC, applied for a 3-year ROTC scholarship. So I was like a general engineering student my first year at Michigan Tech. And went to AIT. So again, split option. So you go back to you do your MOS training as an administrative specialist, like going out to tents with typewriters. That was the field. I can't make this up. Again, you got to remember, I was very docile, and but just basic training gave me a little more confidence. And then while I was at AIS or AIT, my mom sent me a letter or something, said I'd been accepted for ROTC scholarship. So I essentially finished that out at Fort Jackson, came home, signed my ROTC contract, which then ended my enlistment obligation to some extent. I'm sure if I dropped out, I'd have that enlistment anyway.
And do you communicate with anybody from basic training or AIT anymore?
I do not.
Facebook wasn't around back then.
Right. And like I said, we just got internet 3 years ago here at the farm. So I'm not on Facebook or any socials or anything like that. Only LinkedIn, like I said. But I didn't, probably a little bit. Remember back then it was either call or write a letter in 90, 91. But I certainly do stay in touch with a couple Army buddies that I was at officer basic course and I served with at Fort Bragg, and through that, I stay in touch with probably half a dozen of them.
How about the ROTC?
I saw a couple of them at Casque when we were at Fort Leavenworth. PowerPoint, 3 weeks, wasn't it? Basically presentations, command and staff.
Is that captain's career course? Is that the one?
No, you got your captain's career course. So you got officer basic course, cherry lieutenants. Mm-hmm. Do your 4 years active, and then if you stay in, then you go to captain's career course. And after that, they send you basically staff officer school for 3 weeks at Fort Leavenworth.
So your administrative specialist came in handy then?
I never learned how to type, but on the final test, I could do like 42 words a minute because you just memorize the memorandum of record.
That's one way to do it.
It's the military, right?
Yeah.
So it's like if you can figure out a way to pass, and it was legit. I mean, you can't really copy or anything typing, so did that anyway. Michigan Tech 5 years, took a little longer.
Were you in a fraternity? I think
I was.
about this.
Yep. Yeah. Delta Upsilon.
So tell me a little bit about that. Or what you can tell me. I know. There's secrets.
No, we're not. We're a non-secret fraternity, not a professional organization. Like civil engineers, but we're non-secret. So of course there was your typical knuckleheadness and like that, but we were, at Michigan Tech. There's 12 fraternities, and we're more like the flannel wearing, holy jean,
which was popular
some recreational
in the 90s,
use.
Right?
What's that?
Which was really popular in the 90s.
Right, the grunge stuff. Well, we weren't the pop polo Delt Cigs. Oh, yeah. I'm sorry.
Neither was I.
Well, at least at Michigan Tech, that was like the khaki polo. We were definitely not that. We were more like the flannel wearing. And it's Michigan Tech, so it's cold enough for a flannel all year round. Yep, did 5 years on that. Went to my advanced course. Again, I had a lot of fun in college. I was involved minimally extent in ROTC. Didn't do any of the Ranger Challenge, all the high-speed stuff. This goes back to meeting people later, from ROTC.
Who was, I'm sorry, we got to back up a little bit. What was the main reason you joined the military?
Probably my grandfather, my Grandpa Wetzel.
Okay.
Even though we never talked about it, but I highly respected his service. Mm-hmm. I knew enough to know that. And I respected him. So I would say probably that. And I knew that I could get college paid to some extent. Mom and Dad didn't save up. They were raising 3 boys within 4 years and just trying to feed us. Dad working third shift and farming at the same time was there was an extra cash flow, so to speak, which was fine. Mm-hmm. So paid our way through college. Graduated, got commissioned. My Grandpa Wetzel was the first one who gave me my salute, gave me the coin. That was really special that Mom and Dad brought him up there, being a World War II veteran. And Might have been the first time I think I saw him, tear up a little bit, because he was very short. He might have been 5'3", 5'4", but I could tell he was pretty proud. Then they kept me around for 3 months, making lieutenant's pay, living in the fraternity house, being a go-by recruiter for local high school kids.
You had been living the dream, right?
Barrel every weekend. You can imagine. And, people were good to me, so you kind of pay it forward. And back those days, you could have that. Anyway, did 3 months, then went to officer basic course. I was engineer branch officer. Being an engineer, that was pretty much where everybody went. I think I might have tried armor because I went to CTLT at Fort Knox, a little 3-week stint, kind of like interning, ROTC's way of helping you figure out what you want to do. I was with an armor unit there. Oh, no, it was a CAV. I remember that was the first time I had to speak in front of people and recite Fiddler's Green to earn my spurs, so to speak, and I was so nervous. Remember, I was very docile. I was self-conscious about being the tallest. When you screw up in basic training, you can see the tall guy. Anyway, just the military experience kind of built my confidence a little bit. Went to officer basic course, all the combat engineering, bridge recons, troop leading procedures, practice, everything a cherry lieutenant does with engineer focus. And I was supposed to go to Germany. I got engaged right before school. I graduated college with my wife, Chris, and she had a horse, right? She lived in Novi area.
Horse in Novi.
A horse. Actually, it was Walled Lake. So in a Wolverine Lake around there, yeah. There was a farm right beside her, horse boarded there. It wasn't what we think of Novi now. There was an open pasture and everything and all that. Anyway, so she was like, okay, so where are we going? Germany. Okay, how are we getting the horse there? Well, I don't think so. Don't think we can take your horse. Why do you need a horse? At that age, you're just self-absorbed and thinking about going to Oktoberfest. Still thinking I'll just get married and still do what I do in college. Well, talked about it a little more. It's like, I got to take my horse, or who knows? Don't know how this is going to work out. Like, okay, well, I'll call branch. So this is all while I'm all at officer basic course trying to figure out my next duty station when I was supposed to go to Germany. It's like, what else can I do? 2 options, Fort Bragg or Korea. It's like, again, I would say underachiever, did the bare minimum, had other priorities in the military. It's like, well, I'm not going to Korea. That's 18 months. Well, sure, I'll go to Fort Bragg. Well, I had no idea. Remember, Grandpa never talked about it. Fort Bragg, pretty high speed unit from what I heard, airborne, this and that. So I started training up for Ranger School and found out, well, if I go to Fort Bragg, I'm going to have to go to the airborne school, Ranger School, Things didn't work out at basic course as far as Ranger School train up, had a slot. I can say I made excuses or whatever, got bronchitis, whatever. I wasn't healthy enough to go, and I told my CO, I don't know if it was the jitters or something. I was like, there's no way I'm going to Ranger School when I can barely take a half a breath. I was down for like 2 weeks, laid up. Anyway, so I get sent to Fort Bragg as a cherry lieutenant with no tab and no airborne wings. So they didn't send me to division. They sent me to corps, and they kept me at brigade level. So I was like the assistant brigade S1. Basically, you sit over there until you go to airborne school, and we'll let you PT with us. And in the meantime, we'll just give you memorandums. Again, administrative specialist. I knew what a memorandum of record was. I knew that. Went to airborne school. Okay. Then they let me go to battalion. And you don't get a platoon until you go to Ranger School. Unless you just didn't make it. You got to at least go. I was the assistant S1 at battalion. I don't know what it was with that. I was a pack guru, let me tell you that. Did 6 months there, then went to Ranger School. in like October. Got lucky, call it grace of God or whatever, straight through, through Rap Week, through Benning, through Dahlonega, Georgia, through Florida, Swamp Face. I just didn't quit. There was a lot of studs there, but made it through. Next thing I know, there's my XO there, who I kind of worked with as S1, and he's there to, put the tab on me. Then I get a platoon. So I come back and then I get a combat engineer platoon with the 37th Engineer Battalion. I keep track with 3 or 4 of all those guys, 5. Me and the other platoon leaders, the light equipment platoon leader, the other combat engineer platoon leader, my CO, my company commander. We're all in a chat group, So every couple months something will pop up. So I did a year as a platoon leader. Oh, by the way, everything falls in my lap, okay? Everything does. Somehow, I get my platoon like in December and January. The platoon I took over just won Sapper Stakes. Ed Diaz, good friend of mine still, retired battalion commander, now lives out in Flagstaff because he went to northern Arizona. I think that's right where the school is, somewhere out there.
So what is Sapper Stakes?
So Sapper Stakes is like in your infantry battalions, you have your ranger competitions, internal. It's basically a competency deal, but at a platoon level and squad level, not individual. At most from what I understand, combat engineer units have Sapper Stakes. It's like a camaraderie deal, but it's a competition. Well, they had just won Sapper Stakes, so they got to go down to Key West Special Forces Dive School, and I took over before they left. So I get a platoon that's the most squared away platoon with the most squared away platoon sergeant. By the way, Somali vet, prior service, or 10th Mountain Division. He came from 10th Mountain. Wasn't Ranger qualified, but just hard as nails. Extremely smart. Anyway, we jump in to the ocean. Like that's my first jump coming out of Ranger school. And it's, it's with PT shorts on with Special Forces dudes that we rig up in the C-130 on the way down. So best jump I ever had was like my 6th jump, right? After jump school. Stayed down there for 30 days building docks for the Special Forces Dive School, the U.S. Army Special Forces Dive School. But they had all the other branches there. Never even knew it's on its own key, just one bridge coming in. And, we jumped in, students were coming out and their Zodiacs picked us up and built docks, just like you would see a dock now, but, with treated lumber and rebuilt docks. And that was one of the core missions, because we weren't in division, but that was sweet, right? It's like your first deployment, you're Key West working in PT shorts and shirt. Came back, did my combat engineer time. Then I took over a light equipment platoon leader. Almost a year of that. And it was like, hey, Wetzel, there's an opening at the Sapper Leader course for the chief instructor. It's like the officer. It's like a senior first lieutenant because you have an E8, like a first sergeant. And then E6s and E7s. Basically, on airborne status, work under General Flowers, and you're just his separate detachment. He was the Corps of Engineer, 3-star then, I think, at Leonardwood, which was just amazing, right? You got the most. Have you ever heard of Sapper Leader Course?
I've heard of Sappers, but not Sapper Leader Course.
Yep. So the Sapper tab, that was the school where it's basically us engineers consider that our Ranger school. It's heavy combat engineering, bridge recon. It's leadership principles, but you go through as a squad, or in the day, you go through as a squad or a platoon. It was meant to build affinity with your cohorts, right? Now it's changed, and now that there's a tab, individuals go, and now it's just tab chasers instead of having your squad leaders learn how to lead with their soldiers in that environment. Now it's just, you get thrown into it. It's like Ranger School is now. Did that for a year, and then went to officer basic course. Officer advanced course at Fort Leonard Wood. Went to grad school. They sent me to grad school for a year. So while I was at the basic course, I took night classes. And then for a year after that, kind of like a pause. And I was just a full-time grad student, playing golf in the morning, walking in sandals with my other engineer buddies who were captains too, before we went on to our assignment.
So was that like an Army school, or was it like a...
No, it was Missouri Rolla.
Okay.
University of Missouri. And it was a unique relationship because we were the Corps of Engineer School, and Missouri Rolla is like their equivalent to the Michigan Tech is here. It's their S&T school, science and technology kind of deal. And they had an arrangement where some of our credits that we took for the captain's course, and I got a Master of Science out of it, engineering management. So it wasn't a thesis per se. It's management, math, focus on engineering, more complex stuff like that. Got sent to Bragg. I wanted to go. Of course, at that point, I've, been to air assault school, been to airborne school, been to ranger school, been to sapper school, been around all these premier NCOs that really helped me be a better leader, because they wouldn't they wouldn't allow anything less than the best. Just like my first platoon sergeant, sometimes he had to square me away. But went back to Bragg, 82nd Airborne, 307th Engineer Battalion. There's some in between there, some JRTC, things like that, deployments. But then went to Bragg, was there for a year and a half. My battalion maintenance officer, assistant S3. My wife and I got pregnant, and we had, this goes back to the question you said, think about why you got out. So in my mind right now, everything was, I was kicking ass, right? In my mind, I was, right? And the Army thought I was too, Remember in the day when they had to do the so many percent and the 1, somebody 2. So I was 1, promote below the zone, and sometimes they got flowery when that wasn't required because they wanted to get people promoted. But, yeah, the world was my oyster, so to speak. And then my wife and I got pregnant. We planned on it. And between us being pregnant, and I had a S3 major who was a prior Frederick Drummond, who was a prior service E6 in the 307th Engineer Battalion, but then came back as an officer just for whatever reason. This is Smokey, by the way. Did not trust his NCOs, and he had some of the best NCOs in our office. And my wife said, we'll stay in the Army as long as you're having fun. And, I was like, I kind of want to raise my family back home in Concord. And so I went and told my boss, like, you don't trust your NCOs, you're doing them a disservice, and I'm resigning. He's like, okay, turn your paperwork in. He was a hard ass. He had no sympathy, but I wasn't looking for it. Of course, at that time, I'd been doted on. So, it's like, oh, boy, I guess we're all expendable, right? Especially in the unit. Nobody was going to show any sympathy for anybody. Anyway, had a great battalion commander when I left, Colonel Ford. Gave me like the max terminal leave I could get, which is, I think, is 90 days on top of whatever leave you got. I mean, the very max. So I left Fort Bragg like February 2002, and I had like 90 days of leave. Might have been, you were a commander. I'm not sure what the max terminal leave, but added that all up, came back. Grandpa and Grandma had lived in this house, and they moved into like a semi-retirement home, got their own apartment, go have lunch and dinner together kind of deal with everybody else. So my wife came home February. My first daughter was born February 10th. So I might have been home a couple weeks trying to get the house ready, and started our life here in Concord on Grandpa and Grandma's farm.
So when you got out, you came right back. When did you start working at Consumers Energy? Did you have any career like any other?
Oh yeah, I've been around. So one, I never did have a deployment other than, as far as tours overseas, like you guys did. But I kind of look back. It's like I had a couple of real good friends and going and, that didn't make it, and seeing their family, just handing that flag to their spouses and their daughters and their kids is like, as much as it was all about me when I was in my career, that was the best thing, because it would have been pretty sad if my daughters would have had to, or at least, go through that. But, I try to honor those that served. And by having the pig roast every year, Memorial Day. And that's one thing that I always convey to everybody is let's honor them by enjoying ourselves. That's why we serve, to give us liberties here at home, whatever you think, you get to live your life the way you want. So I went to work for a consulting firm as an engineer. So what am I? 24. I'm 31. Really never did engineering, right? I did when you're an engineering student, you can take this engineer in training exam. And I did pass that before I graduated college. And that allows you to take your PE. Have you heard of professional engineer stamp? Your license. Worked for an engineering firm for a year in Ann Arbor. Still got friends from there. Still have friends I keep in touch with. Went to work here in Concord. Thought I'd work closer to home, right? For an underground contractor for 3 years. Well, I was in Blissfield. I was past Ann Arbor. Contractor. I was around. I was in Newaygo, whatever. Did that 3 years. So that's sewer and water. Being a project manager, their engineer, the owner realized he was making $10 million a year, and he just can't pound the table to get change orders anymore, like the old school contractors. So he hired me because he had a $5 million contract, and he just got big enough that he needed help. Went back to engineering. I left after 3 years. I learned a lot. It was his business, but I would never breach my integrity or lie, cheat, or steal. So I was like, hey, that's for you. It's not for me, and I won't do that. It kind of wears on you, right, when you get leaned on to do that. So I was like, thank you. I learned a lot. Went to work back in Ann Arbor as a consulting firm for 9 years. I was Pittsfield, Ann Arbor Township engineer, embedded there. Washington County Road Commission, Washington County Drain Commission, their engineer of record kind of deal. So I learned Washington County pretty good, city of Ann Arbor, around that. And then I moved to Consumers 9 years ago.
Okay. So
kind of like military, consulting, engineer, construction, contracting company, and then to Consumers Energy. That's where I've been for the last 9 years as of June last month.
So who was the first person you met at Consumers Energy? First supervisor, first friend?
Jim Sunday. My only supervisor for 9 years. That is so rare. And he is a friend of mine. We've been on projects together. He's been my supervisor pretty much other than a year and a half ago. We'd be on projects, pipeline projects throughout the state. And Wednesday night was our night. We, grab steaks and potato salad from Meyer and a 6-pack of Killian's Red, which is pretty inexpensive to expense. And, grill out and then we golf on Tuesday nights and pick up league in Jackson at Hickory.
What course? Hickory?
Yep. That's his place, even though it's a goat trail. But you can, whether you got 4 people or 18 guys, they don't care. So, Jim Sunday, and he took the VSP separation. but he's staying on through the current major pipeline project, Mid-Michigan Phase 1, until October 1st.
Okay. And when did you start with VAP, or the Veterans Advisory Panel at Consumers Energy?
Let's take a quick break.
Veterans Archives is a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and we rely on donations from our listeners. If you are enjoying these stories and would like to support our continued efforts, please go to www.veteransarchives.org and select the donate button. Thank you.
It might have been like 6 months after Bill, or maybe when they were trying to put it together. Bill and Curtis were the OGs, right? The original
Gangsters,
or the original trying to get it moving with Broshek. And I believe, I remember, I don't know if this was the first, but it was one of the early, probably first 6 months. I don't know, maybe 2015, 2016. We met in Lansing. We're all around the table. And I think Angela Tompkins might have been there when she was with the old HR, maybe, before, when it was called that or something.
Yeah, she had, don't mean to interrupt, but she had put together a bunch of us on a phone call to ask about veteran issues, and that's when Curtis and I said, well, let's just do a Veterans Advisory Panel. So we had that initial meeting in Lansing, and then we locked ourselves in a room in Owasso for 2 days.
Yes. Yep.
And you were, so Damien was there right from the inception of the Veterans Advisory Panel.
So in some ways, you're an OG as well.
Maybe charter member? Yeah. Is that okay?
Yeah, we'll give
Charter member?
Plank owner.
Yeah, plank owner. Yeah, so that's, and that's been great. That, one, my supervisor, Jim Sunday, has always promoted involvement within the company outside of just being a project manager. His soft skills are amazing. He's as everybody knows. Yep. So I kind of plugged myself into Veterans Advisory Panel. And it was like, yeah, that was some of that camaraderie, just like what we talked about, that, don't even have to know a person. Within 5 minutes, you're talking about some common thread, whether you're in the Navy or they are in the Army or the Air Force or whatever, or Marine. And even those that didn't serve, I think look, this past year, we had 3 or 4 steering committee members that didn't serve, but they felt like they wanted to connect with a company, and it was a worthwhile endeavor, and they just liked the camaraderie and our knuckleheadness sometimes with giving each other crap.
So what are some of the most memorable Veterans Advisory Panel events that you've done?
Events and endeavors, I'd say the inaugural Veterans Day event at the Cascades Manor that me and Bob Moore were event co-chairs, along with Stella. And true professionals, both of them in their own way. Bob was in the Navy, and Stella is a retired full bird colonel. She ended up being a full bird colonel, retiring a couple years ago after last deployment. So that was a first time endeavor. Didn't have anything to base it off of. But the one thing I remember from that, there's a lot of effort, weekly meetings. We had a total script for that first, partially due to Bob Moore, and thankfully to Bob Moore. We had things down to like the minute in the itinerary. I think that was also when we released the video that's on YouTube now on stigmas potentially of veterans. And people still follow up with me on that because it's on YouTube. It's like, what are some of the stigmas? and different employees at Consumers Energy that served, that are veterans, some of the stigmas they encountered, like you're just a Marine grunt. I remember Travis, but it was so well put together. And was that Darren that put that together? Clevenger?
Yeah, Darren Clevenger and the internal comms team.
Yeah, and I think Darren had just started working with us, and he had an amazing resume, and it was just very professional. So we played that at our inaugural event. There was 4 or 5 vice presidents there. I won't name names, but it was pretty impressive. And it was right at Cascades Manor. Probably had 150 folks, and it was just a great inaugural event to kind of build traction into how else can we, at that time it was, how can we hire veterans? How can we get the civilian workforce to understand the benefits that veterans bring your company or Consumers Energy? We've transitioned now. Bill was, how many years were you the chair, Bill? 3 or 4, 6?
Yeah, I don't know who's interviewing who here. But, yeah, so we actually kicked off we were an actual employee resource group in 2017 was the first year we were an actual resource group.
With how many people?
I think we maybe had 40 or 50 people in the beginning. I think it's at 500 or 600 now. But yeah, so I chaired it for about 3 years and finally handed it off to I think Stella and Brian Lewis.
Brian
took it
and
from
Amber.
me, and Amber Fogarty took over after myself. I don't want to interfere with your
have at it, Bill,
with your interview here, but just some historical data there is that inaugural event really kicked off what is now the premier ERG event at Consumers Energy. Every year, people look forward to the Veterans Day event from the Veterans Advisory Panel. And that's not a slam to any of the other ERGs because they all do great things. But this particular one really draws huge crowds and really brings in some of the best speakers. And so from those humble beginnings with Bob Moore and Damien and others, this has really become something huge. And Damien's being he's being Damien about it, but he was a very large part of the success of that employee resource group. So I will let you continue on with the interview, but I just want to give that historical information just for record.
I think one of the other, so getting the benefits, the leave is probably one of the biggest. Initially, we just got some benefits, make up the difference in your pay when you get deployed for training, for reserve or guard training. If you're losing money going to AT, then we would make up the difference. Well, we realized that became few people utilized it because it was such a nuisance with trying to go back and turn in your late paperwork from the military pay, and then your pay would get docked because you got your full pay. The point is we got to the point 2 years ago that now it's a full 4 weeks. I don't think it's 30 days, 4 weeks. I'm not sure.
Actually, so it's so what we ended up with was the first 30 days of any deployment.
It is
whether
30
it's
days.
Whether it's training or whether it's actual deployment. The first 30 days is 100% pay. So you get all of your pay from the military, all of your pay from consumers. And as an administrator, Damien, you know that was an administrative nightmare to try and get and do it the old way.
It didn't pass the first time.
Right.
I don't think we were prepared the first time, but then we had a round 2. We consolidated.
Why didn't it pass the first time?
I don't think we were organized well enough.
Okay.
It's how well you sell it, and and it was during COVID too, so I don't think we were able to have that seed planning and that effective communication pre-meetings beforehand, and it just somehow got to a certain level without having the sponsorship that something needs to have to get that approved. Round 2 came through. Bill, thank you. He redrafted it, drafted the business case, And then we had sufficient sponsorship, like at 3 VP levels, which, okay, if 3 VPs make a recommendation to a senior VP, that's what they're there for, right? And it passed. Another event, I remember when JP, we were at Central Michigan, and that was inspirational. The Army chaplain in Saginaw.
JP from...
So J.P. Donnell was the second most successful sniper in the history of the Navy SEALs. Here's a guy who got out of the Navy SEALs and couldn't find a job and was delivering pizzas and living out of his car and trying to support his family when Jocko Willink called him up and said, "Hey, I'm putting together this company. You want to come work for me?" And what a great success story. But so J.P. Donnell came and spoke at this event up at Central Michigan University. And it was a pretty inspiring and amazing event. Consumers Energy does a lot of work with Jocko Willink's team for corporate training. And so that's really where that came from. So yeah, J.P. Donnell is the guy that you're talking about.
Yeah, that was amazing. And we actually saw him, Terry Withers and myself, the night before at the hotel. He was staying at our hotel. And then just kind of culminate our annual event. It was pretty unique and I think successful that at last year's event, we had at least one chair from every employee resource group in attendance. And whether that was certainly deliberate on our part, but I know at the very least we would have had attendance from an ERG, but having at least one of the co-chairs from each one, showing that solidarity across the board, kind of helped transition us into collaborating with the other ERGs this year. Like we just had, we've had 2 virtual events with Capable. Last year we had a joint event with Capable, and that was amazing. Different speakers, kind of like telling your own story on things that we work through in our daily lives. But then this year, we had some VA folks earlier this year, which was successful and well attended, more like VA benefits and things you need to know and how to get into the system. Well, just 2 weeks ago, we had 2 therapists from the VA regarding PTS. And I just got the survey results back on that. So there's 143 folks. And oh, by the way, we had some technical glitches. Couldn't produce, had to create a new team invite 5 minutes before the deal. And we even rehearsed the week before. Just like you set up the first virtual where you had the dry run through, did all that, had a producer, dry run through. Somehow for the live event, the producer got deleted. And the guy who set the person who set the event up was off on vacation. Well, we do what we do, right? Adapt and overcome. Okay, just send out, blast everybody. Here's the new link to the team event. And it was really good. These 2 therapists from the VA in Ann Arbor were amazing, transparent, a male and a female therapist, and got really good comments back. More look at the comments than the ratings, but the transparency. So we're looking forward to kind of take it on to step 2 of that this fall with a second episode of how to recognize PTS. I'm being deliberate, not saying D, because the disorder those of us, regardless of who you are, there's a negative connotation. It's like you're not normal. Well, so VA is doing they're trying to rebrand that. So it is PTS, for post-traumatic stress, and everybody gets it. And I think there was over half of the attendees were outside of VAP, and there was every BRG involved. The other 6 now, because 2 consolidated, I believe, attended throughout the company. And, it didn't just have to do with military experience or overseas experience in conflict. They went through and explained anything, sexual assault, abusive relationships, abusive childhood. I mean, it related to everybody, and these therapists were top shelf too. That was very successful. So hopefully we can carry that on this fall.
Awesome. So is there any other events that you could think of? Might have been one in Brighton. And you might be doing it this year too.
We are doing it this year. We're providing a bucket truck. So the Ruck for Life, got to do that with you and with another veteran in the Navy, Sarah, last year. And I still have that picture. I keep that on my phone. We had 2 bucket trucks at 30-foot United States flag hanging, sun coming up around 6:45 or something. Right. And there's us 3 there, along with the 2 bucket truck drivers. So I think there's 5 of us. But that kicked it off. I still remember that. But then the deliberateness of stopping every mile over 7 or 8 miles to recognize someone who committed suicide, that caught up to them, and helping that family and the friends of that person, provide them a little bit of closure and honoring them, was really solemn. I'd never been on one before. And I'm part of the Jackson Military Coalition. Are you aware of that, Bill?
I was not.
Yes. Alyssa Harris, the Veterans Outreach person from the VA in Ann Arbor, they created it last year. We're having one in Jackson, starting off at the Jackson County Fairgrounds 2 weeks before the one in Brighton. And I already got commitment from Consumers Energy for 2 bucket trucks to have the flag there. It's only going to be a 5K because they're starting off. This is their inaugural. But they're going to do that, and everybody is encouraged to wear a ruck. They're getting support from the local National Guard and reserves. I don't know which one it is. That's not my gig. But to wear that ruck, to understand that there's a weight that some people just can't get rid of or can't carry by themselves. So the whole point of it is to help carry the weight, just like we did in the military. If you're sucking up, throw some of your stuff in my pack and I'll help carry it. So that is our first inaugural one in Jackson.
So I am helping out with the one in Brighton now. So if you need help, you got my number. I'd love to help.
Deal. It's a shame. I think ours is first. So, I'm trying to share my experience from last year, the first time, on helping this team of 3 other people on the committee to put this together in Jackson. But it'll be a success. I think the first one's always, you're a little unsure of yourself, but we have good intentions, and there's a lot of support within the Jackson community for it.
Awesome. So is there anyone in particular, or any group of individuals in particular that you think were very impactful in your life, your career in the military and with Veterans Advisory Panel?
Growing up at my parents, but my grandfather made a big impact, even though I didn't really know what he did until right before he passed. He worked at Clark Equipment, World War II, worked at Clark Equipment 30 years, retired, died of cancer in his lungs. Then he kind of talked about it at the very end. He was in artillery, followed Patton.
King of Battle, yeah.
Yep. And that was really neat. Later on, I got to better understand my grandfather's twin brother, Orrin, and what he went through. And I got an opportunity. This impacted me enough that a couple of my Army buddies that I went to basic course with and served with are like, how can you have your grandpa's brother who was died in Bataan and you don't know anything about him? They kind of shamed me as like, I guess I am a bum. And it's like, man, you got to do the Bataan on the 75th anniversary of the Bataan Death March. And so a couple of my Army buddies and I did that. The full marathon through 1.5 miles of sand from 17 to 18.5. and meeting those beforehand, those guys the day before in the auditorium, the survivors, was just so humbling. I think I might have told you, Bill. Yeah. So you got to go meet them, right? And these are 75th anniversary. So they're in their 90s, right? I remember going up guys like, oh man, is that 6 Purple Hearts? He was like, hell no, that's 7. The backing counts as 1. It was like, I mean, he was like, they couldn't kill me. It was like, he still had it. I mean, it was just such an honor. So that really influenced me to kind of learn more about my great uncle. I have an engineer friend that I still keep in touch with at that first consulting company. Chris Wall wasn't in the military at all. And then at the Veterans Advisory Panel, I mean, Bill, you've been a mentor to all of us in the Veterans Advisory
Absolutely.
Panel. Your passion and just your positiveness. I would say anybody who's still in the Veterans Advisory Panel that started off, you were one of the reasons why we're still around. We learned a lot from you, certainly. And all the little nudges, kind of like, this is our crown jewel, don't mess it up, Wetzel. I needed that at the time. I don't know if you realize that. But I appreciate you being able to help refocus when we needed some focusing last year.
And if there's anything you'd want someone who's listening to this to take away from what we talked about, what would that be?
Maybe not what we talked about, but just I think one of the stereotypes is, we joked a lot about in the military, but we were from a cross section of everything. And I think there's a stereotype that people in the military, or maybe guys with crew cuts like myself and flat tops, are extremely rigid, right? It's like, we could be rigid, but we really served to serve our country so people could have liberties to do what they want. I try not to judge people, based on religion or sex or, sexual preference or anything of that. It's like, you do you. While I may have my own faith, and I certainly do, I serve so you can do whatever you want. I'm not prejudiced towards you or dislike a certain group. And sometimes I think there's stereotypes that, you served in the military, so you don't like this certain group of people. It's like totally opposite. You don't get it. I met so much diversity when I was in the military. You see Concord here. Not much diversity here, but when I got there, you met poor from all across the United States. You met wealthy people all across. I would just say, those that serve, we volunteered, at least the ones that I was in. Certainly not drafted like my grandfather, or like those that served in Vietnam. We had a choice. It was an honor to serve for families like yours and mine and Bill's.
Okay. Well, I really appreciate your time meeting with me today, Damien.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Veterans Archives, the podcast that brings you the story of the men and women who have created and lived our military history. If you or someone you know served in the military and would like to share your story with Veterans Archives, please go to www.veteransarchives.org, select the Apply Now button, and fill out our application, and someone will get right back with you. Veterans Archives is a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and we rely on the donations of our listeners. If you are enjoying these stories and you support our efforts, please go to www.veteransarchives.org and select the Donate button. Any donation is certainly appreciated. Look for Veterans Archives on your favorite social media. We are on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. Just look for Veterans Archives. Like, follow, and share our page. We'd certainly appreciate it. If you or someone you know is a veteran and you are struggling with mental health issues, please dial 988 and select option 1 for the Veterans Crisis Hotline. Please be sure to tune in next time for the next episode of Veterans Archives.